Alright, this is my daughter's 1996 Ford Taurus GL. Today we're going to tackle the rear struts, replacing them in this particular vehicle. I'm doing this video because searching the internet provided lots of information on how to replace the rear struts on this Ford Tauruses. But as I started the job, I noticed that there were inconsistencies in what I read and what was required to make it happen on this particular car. So this video, like I said, is based on a 1996 Ford Taurus GL, and we're going to replace the rear struts. There's 4 bolts. There's one right there at the top of the seat, one over there at the top of the seat, one over there at the bottom, and one right there at the bottom. You have to fold the seats down in order to get to the bolts. Alright, once the rear seat is removed, we need to remove the rear deck. It looks like there are 2 plastic clips that hold the deck in place. There's one right there, and the other one over by the seat belt buckle. We'll try and pop those out and see if that's the only thing holding it in place. Okay, using a screwdriver, I'm going to gently pry around the clip. See if I can get it out without breaking it. The 2 clips are now out. Now we need to try and get the rear deck off. I'm hoping to be able to do this without having to remove all of these side panels at the same time. So let's see whether or not I'm going to be able to do that. So it looks like by pulling up in the center, it's going to allow me to wedge out the sides. Let's give this a try and see what happens. There, once the one side's out, hopefully the other side will come out much easier. Be careful of that rear parking light back there. There we go. Alright, so now the deck is out. Now we'll pull out just this insulation. Actually, we don't have to pull it all the way out. Let's just fold it back out of the way. Make life a little easier here. Now notice, there's the strut mount right there on the inside of the vehicle. And there's the one on the passenger side. Alright, so now that we're ready to start removing the struts, the first thing we want to do is loosen the bolts that hold the top of the strut in. We don't want to remove these completely, we just want to loosen them, because as we drop the strut out from the bottom, we want these bolts to hold it while we're working on it. Alright, now that we have the strut loosened from the inside, we want to pop the cover off the lug nuts. And then we're going to loosen the lug nuts. So you want to loosen the lug nuts while the car is still on the ground. It'll help just make things much easier and keep from the car shifting as much. Once we got the lug nuts loosened, we're going to jack the car up and we're going to put a jack stand underneath it. Alright, now that we have the car jacked up and securely on a jack stand, we're going to go ahead and remove the tire. Alright, so here's the old strut. This is what we're going to pull out of it. So the first thing we're going to do, I'm not sure that we really need to do it, but I'm going to do it just to be on the safe side, is we're going to remove this bolt from this brake line. The reason why we're going to do that is as we're dropping the spindle to pull the strut off, I want that brake line to be able to have flex in it so that we don't put a kink in the line. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to remove this spindle nut right here on the sway bar. On the other side, when I did it, I also took out the nut right here that held the sway bar in place. I think this time I'm going to try to not take that nut out, and we're going to see if I can get this rod out and get the spindle out, or get the sway bar out of the way without having to completely disassemble everything. Alright, now with that loose, like I said, just pull that out and notice now how that can move around. I don't want to bind it up. I don't want to pinch this metal tube right here, but I want to allow the rubber tube to be able to move and have some freedom so that when we drop the spindle that it doesn't bind up, like I said. Alright, so now we're going to work on trying to pull the spindle out. Or pardon me, the bushing for the sway bar. So this thing is going to turn down here on the bottom, as you can see right there. Then it's also going to turn up here at the top. So in order to effectively take this out, what we want to do is use an end wrench on the top. And there is no super magic way to do this, short of feeling around till you got it where you want it. And then we're going to use a ratchet on the bottom. I don't know if you can tell, but the whole rod's turning on me, so it's actually unscrewing the top one, which I'm okay with that, because like I said, I want to try and remove it completely without having to take the whole sway bar out. Alright, the top nut is off for me. Now I've got to get the bottom nut off. I don't know if you can see it here. I'm going to get a light in here and see if it'll make it easier. I don't know that makes it easier. But anyway, on this bolt that runs through here, there's a flat on it. So as I try and turn off the bottom nut, what I'm going to do is use a wrench on this bolt right here on the flat to get it to hold the bolt steady for me, so the nut will come off on the bottom. That's all the way off. It's not all the way off, but it's at the end. It'll come off easy. Now the one thing I didn't do, which would make this a lot easier if you're doing this yourself, if you have the time, the night before, go ahead and bring the car into your garage, put it up on jack stands, get the wheels off, and then spray all these bolts down with a WD-40 or something that will help loosen things up. If you can't do it the night before, then maybe bring the car in your garage, tear one wheel off on one side, spray everything down, go to the other side, take that wheel off, spray everything down, then go back to the first side and start working on it first. You just want to give that WD-40 a little bit of time to soak in, to try and loosen up these joints to make things come out a little bit easier. And let's see if this thing's going to give me enough movement, and I don't think it's going to be able to get this bolt out, and it's not. Alright, so now we're going to do what I was going to try not to do to begin with. And that is drop the sway bar mount. And it's not a big deal to drop it, I was just trying to save myself an extra step. Okay, so the only difference here would be that if you're not if you're going to replace that bushing and that bolt that goes through, then all you really have to do is unhook the bottom if you're going to drop this mount as well. The fact that I unhooked the top and the bottom was I was trying to get it out without pulling the mount. But if I would have just unscrewed the bottom, it would have stayed attached to the strut, which is no big deal. It would have just gotten thrown away with the strut itself. But doesn't matter, it's out now. The next thing we've got to remove is right here is the bolt that holds the strut in the spindle. So this pinch assembly right here, this is the pinch bolt that holds it all together. Again, this bolt can be in there fairly tight and it can be difficult to get out. So it's good to spray this down with something like a WD-40 if you have it, and if you can. If not, we'll just muscle it out. Alright, that technically is everything that's holding that strut in place right now. So now what we get to do is beat it out, for lack of a better phrase. As this assembly's been bolted around the strut, it's now clamped onto it, and so we've got to knock it off of there. So the easiest way to do that is with a block of wood and a hammer. Alright, just so you can see here, you can already see those few hits I did on it where it's starting to move on me. So we're going to continue that process and knock it all the way out. It takes a little while, so bear with it and just keep working on it. Now see, it's moved quite a bit, but it's got quite a bit left it's got to go. Where I'm putting the block of wood, see if I can maneuver the light here. So basically, all I'm doing is I'm putting the block of wood right here, and that's where I'm hitting it from. And it's just keep hitting it down. You'll see it's moved about an inch right there. But from the bottom, it's got about another inch before it's up into the pinch bracket to begin with, and then another inch and a half to get out of the pinch bracket. So I've got a good another 2.5, 3 inches that it's got to come down in order to come out all the way. Alright, so as you can see, it's coming along, but it's still got a good another inch to go. Just takes a while. Okay, well, I'm not gonna lie, that gets tiring after a bit. But as you can see, it's come out now. So now it's freed from the spindle. Alright, so now what we have to do is go ahead and pull the bolts out of the top, and then we can lift that spindle straight on out. So stay right here, I'll be right back. Now with those 3 bolts off in the top, we should be able to maneuver the strut on out of there. Be careful as you pull it out. You don't want to hook it up on any of the brake lines or anything else. And there it is. There's the old strut. So now let me grab the new one and we're going to reverse the procedure and put the new one back in. Alright, so here's the new strut. What we bought was the Monroe Econo struts. They were about $112 a piece, if I remember correctly. They're hopefully going to be a decent strut. Definitely not the top of the line, but definitely not the cheapest one out there either. It comes with new bolts for the top up here. So the old ones that we took off inside you can throw away. And then this little yellow tag, I'd go ahead and remove it. Ironically enough, this little yellow tab tells you that it's this side up. You know, let's be honest right now. If you don't know which side of the strut goes to the top, then you really don't need to be doing this job. It's not that difficult of a job, but it is also not that difficult to know which side goes up and which side goes down, especially if you just took one out of the car. Alright, so when we put it in, this tab right here at the back, this will go toward the back, and then we'll have to try and line it up at the top to make sure that we hit the holes where the bolts can go through at the top. So this is really just a maneuvering, trying to wedge it up in there and to get the bolts to go through at the top. I wouldn't worry too much about the tab at the bottom at this current moment, because as it goes in at the top, it's going to force the tab into alignment where it needs to be. There we go. Now I've got the holes started at the top. Now what I'm going to do is try and hold that up. I'm going to push down on the spindle assembly to try and get the bottom of the strut kind of toward the hole where it's going to be going to begin with. There. That's what I was talking about. Pushing down on it to where I could get it resting at the beginning of that hole where it's destined to go to begin with. Now we're going to go into the inside of the car and we're going to screw the nuts on to hold the top of the strut in place while we work on it down here. There's the new bolts where they came through. We're not going to screw these on tight, but we're going to screw them down to hold the strut in place. Then once everything's said and done, we'll come back in here and we'll tighten it up. Now, like I said, if you put the bolts in at the right orientation up top, this tab at the back is going to be lined up where it needs to be. And you'll see as you put this thing together, that tab right there is going to slide down into the slit on that pinch joint. And then as you push the spindle up onto the strut, this hole right here is going to be lined up where the pinch bolt goes. So when you're done, when you put the pinch bolt in, it goes through the whole piece here, but also through this hole on the strut itself. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. Now in order to get the strut to go up, or to get the spindle to go up on the strut, the easiest way to do that is to use your jack. Okay, so the way I do that is I try and position the jack so that it's on the spindle down here. This is the bottom of the spindle where the torsion bar or strut bar, whatever you want to call it, goes through the spindle. I've got my jack underneath it, and as I push up on the jack, you'll see that it's going to lift the whole assembly. So as the assembly's lifting, what we're going to do here a little bit is we're going to just manually manipulate it in order to try and get it to straighten out a little bit as it's coming up onto the strut. Notice how it's crooked coming onto the strut? I want to try and even it out a little bit. as you'll see, what I've done is I've just moved the jack over to the edge of the spindle where that torsion bar or whatever it is comes down and holds it. And that's going to make that side lift. And as you can see, if it's coming up, it's straightening up a little bit, which is what I'm trying to get it to do. Okay, now that's straightened up fairly nicely. Now what I'm going to do is try and push back on the assembly and get it to try and line up just a little bit more up in there. There we go. That's exactly where I wanted it. So that's lined up a little bit better. Now as we go up, let's see what's going to happen here. Now what I really need to do is move the jack, because it's going to keep torquing on that one side, which is what I don't want it to do, because I don't want to throw it off any more than it already is. So let's move the jack again. Beautiful. Alright, that's where I want it, right there. Alright, so now, hopefully, as we jack up, we should see that it slides down. There we go. Now it's starting to move. See how it's snap. That's what we wanted. Kind of violent, I understand, but that's what we wanted it to do. And we're going to back the jack back down a little bit. Alright, now the difficult part. And the difficult part is getting the pinch pin in place, aligned where it needs to be aligned, and get everything to go in the way it's supposed to. So, you've got to come over here. Easiest way that I found to do this, grab a flashlight, get down in there, and try and look through that hole to see if everything's lining up. You can already tell by looking at it down here at the bottom that it's not lining up. Whoop, as I break my camera. You can already tell by looking at it down there at the bottom as it's not lining up. See that piece of the tab that's sticking out? So what I've got to do is pull the spindle back down on it. And that's the same process that it was to pull the strut out to begin with. I'm going to get my block of wood and my hammer, and I'm going to knock on the spindle a little bit to push it back down. Okay, so we want to be a little bit carefuler this time. We don't want to go too far. Try and minimize how many times we're going to fight with this thing. Alright, that should get us a little bit closer. Let's grab the flashlight again. Alright, let's see if you can see that. Not sure how well you can see it. You can see the blue tab in there. See how it's about halfway through that hole? So I need to come down a little bit further to get it to line up in that hole for me. Now if you can see up in there, again, I'm not sure how clear you can see it, but at the very top of that you still see a little bit of blue. So what I need to do is knock it down just a hair more to try and get that last bit of blue out of the way. Alright, that looks like that may have got it. And you can see all the way through it, there's no blue anywhere. So the whole purpose for going through this, to try and get that thing to line up, is to make assembly or getting this pin in there much easier. With that blue in the way, this pin doesn't go in. Because of the fact everything's rusted in there, you know, 17 years old. So everything's a little old, a little rusted up in there. Give it some friendly persuasion with the hammer to get it through. Try and start the threads by hand. And if we're lucky, I believe we got it. That's in there. The pinch bolt's installed. It's back installed where it needs to be. Now we need to put that brake line back into place. Okay, make sure as you put that in place, notice there's a little tab on this back side and a hole for it to go in. Make sure you get all that back in place where it needs to be. Now we're going to try and put this bushing back into place. Let's move the camera back over here. Let's do it this way. Alright. Cockeyed view. Alright. That's much easier. The other side, when I went to put this back in place, the reason why I was trying not to remove it was kind of a pain to get up in there. But it was a pain to get up in there because I'd already put the bolt from the strut down through it, and so it had tension on it. You know, a smarter person would probably do what I'm doing right now and just put it in place before I put the bottom bolt back on. Bushing kit back in there. So there's the top of the bushing that's going to go in. Once we've got that through, we need to take the next bushing and washer and feed it up on the bolt. Okay, once all that's up in place, we'll take the spacer, feed it up, then we'll take another washer and another bushing. Alright, the one thing about these bushings, notice you've got kind of a flat side on it, and then you've got another side with a little lip. The little lip is what goes up toward the bushing, or toward the mounts. You've got the washer that goes against the flat side, and then for instance, this is what would go up against the bottom here, and then on the top, of course, you'd flip it over, so it'd go that way. And then the same down here at the bottom as we're into the sway bar. So the lip will go up toward the top on the bottom one into the sway bar. All right, come on, Junior. There we go. We're done. Now we're going to put the wheel back on. Then we have to tighten down on the inside. So we'll get the tire back on. Get the lug nuts on in place, hand tight. We'll jump in the car. We'll tighten down the top of that strut. Then we'll take the car off the jack stands, tighten the lug nuts up, And we're done. Yeah, we're gonna put the rear of the car back together too, sorry. Okay, now we're back on the inside of the car. We're going to tighten down the top of the strut. Now that those are tight, we're going to put the sound insulation back in place. Okay, now that we got all that in place, now we got to put the deck back on. So what we'll do is we'll start one corner, kind of like we did, pulling it out, and then once we got one corner in, we'll wedge the other corner in place, and we'll go from there. Alright, that side's almost. In place. That wasn't too bad. There's only one whoop as I was doing it, if you caught it. Be careful when you're putting it back in. I don't know if you can tell. This is the stoplight for the back. There's a groove for it to go into. So you just got to be careful and make sure you get it into that groove correctly. Alright. Now we've got to grab the back of the rear seat. And we'll get that put in there. And then hopefully we're done. So give me just a minute, let me grab the back and I'll be right back. Got the rear seat back up in here. It's not in place yet. So we gotta get the seat belts moved out of the way. We're gonna open the seat and I'll show you why here in a second. It kind of lifts up and slides into place. There we go. That side's in place. See, when everything's in place, there's 4 bolts. There's one right there at the top of the seat, one over there at the top of the seat, one over there at the bottom, and one right there at the bottom. You have to fold the seats down in order to get to the bolts. Alright, it's all done now. So I got the back seat put back into place, everything's screwed down, dropped the car back on the ground, got the tires, wheels tightened up, got the caps back over the lug nuts. The car sits a little bit higher like I would have expected. Everything looks good. So we're going to take it for a test drive here in a minute and make sure that everything's working the way it should. Those of you who are paying attention, you realize that I forgot to put the plastic clips back in on the rear deck when I put it back in. I did. I forgot to put the plastic clips back in. Right now I don't care. So everything's in there fairly tight. I don't think it's going anywhere. I think it'll be fine without them. Anyway, that's how you do the rear struts on a 1996 Ford Taurus. Next, we're going to do the front struts. Thank you. Goodbye.